Alright, so got the frame done. Now it's a case of doing the drawers. Bit of a problem with the drawers. I don't think I've got enough wood for the drawer fronts, so I'll have to resolve that when I come across that problem. But to start off with, let's get the measurements done. So switch to voiceovers. Yes, it's voiceover time. Now you see me using a Zollstock to take measurements, as I actually found it to be a lot more accurate and easier to read than a normal tape measure. The reason I have one is that I got it from Jonas Sean at Shadow Foam when he gave one away with every winning bid on his Whatnot live stream a few months ago. Now you may or may not believe me, but I had spent at least a good hour sorting out the bandsaw, ready to do some ripping. That included putting a new blade in, checking the guide bushings and getting the tensions right. I even did a couple of test cuts, but it fell on me, so I went to cut the pieces to length, well, with a slight overcut on the miter saw. I then trimmed them down so that I could rip them on the table saw with one pass. I didn't want to have a need to flip them over. As you can see, I did use a boar feather board to aid me with the rip, and then I had to make sure that the gripper didn't touch the blade at all. Keeping a cool, calm head and steady hand while doing this really helps. I was very relieved when this part was done. Now it's on to laminating the pieces together, as two bits make one side. I also had to calculate which clamps I was going to use for the long pieces and also the short ones. I used a lot of them up, especially some of my newer clamps. I don't know why, but I never seem to be able to get a good squeeze out of the glue bottle with one hand, as I always seem to use two, and I do check it every time for blockages. Time to cut all the sides to the final lengths, and the only way to do that is on the miter saw. Then I went on to cut the rebates on the table saw. A fun fact, this is actually the first time that I've cut rebates on the table saw. Normally I would have done them on the router table, and more recently by hand. I felt at least with a table saw I could literally creep up on the actual width that I needed it to be. Okay, so cutting the miters on the table saw. I know that I should have used a miter gauge, but the one that I have is actually meant for my bandsaw, so there is a little bit of movement in the miter slot. All I can say is don't do as I did and learn from my mistakes. So I finished them off on the miter saw. After I got the miters cut, it was time to glue up the drawers, and that also meant trying to use as many clamps as possible. I made sure that I put glue in the rebate so that the base would have a good solid holding. On the unit, I cut the splines by hand. This time, I did think it was worthwhile to use a different method. I do have a jig that I made for the router table, but when I checked, it wouldn't have been very secure enough for the width of the drawer. So instead, I decided to use a table saw. And I set up a stop block so that the cuts would all stop in the same place. With having the drawers on the sides and not set in an angle, it did make the splines more interesting, as one side would have a short cut and the other a slightly longer cut. As with the main unit, again I used Padauk for the actual splines, and I just had to trim a few pieces down to the correct width. It was always my intention to use what could be classed as traditional runners instead of the modern day metal ones. So it was a case of measuring and cutting them to size. The scrap wood that I'm using is actually some of the offcuts from this project, so it was always a good way of making the most of the wood bought for this project. After I had the runners cut to size and thickness, I decided I would secure them using 3 screws, and I would inset them a little bit by using a forcener bit. Now it might seem a bit strange to use some blue tape, but the reasoning behind it was just to make sure that there was no movement whilst I was drilling into the drawer, and it worked. Okay, you may not actually notice this, but I do make a mistake here. Yes, another one. The space from the base of the unit to the lower part of the drawer runner was 60mm, but what I did was make a spacer that was 60mm wide instead of deducting the height of the drawer runner. When I try to work out the top drawer, well, that's when the mistake comes to light. Pure joy, fixing the mistake. Now that I've got all that sorted, it was time to cut the drawer fronts. After a quick test fit on the bottom drawer, I just had to plane a little bit back just to make it fit. I watched a Wood Whisperer video recently. The part I was interested in was fitting the drawer fronts. And one thing he mentioned and demonstrated was to use the drilled holes which were for the handles to temporarily attach the front and then drill and insert screws from the back. It was a very good piece of advice and I'm glad I watched that video. And now, enjoy some music until the unit is finished. That was my best radio voice. So finally, the unit is finished. The drawers are done. I'm not going to say I'm extremely happy about it. I'm just more relieved that it's done now. There are still a few errors I've done in the end where the drawers don't fully line up, but they're in there. And so all I'm going to ask is, if you've enjoyed this painstaking 3 video series, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and then also watch this video to see how it all came about.